In court, my wife laughed. The judge is my lover. You're leaving this room with nothing, soldier. My wife smirked. He's too scared to even speak. Look at him. Her lawyer laughed, then slid a paper in front of me. Sign it. Now. He had no idea who I really was. The courtroom was colder than I expected. Not the kind of cold that came from the air conditioning, but the kind that crept into your bones when you realized every eye in the room was waiting to see you fall. The polished wood smelled faintly of old varnish and floor polish, and the whispers carried like ghostly echoes from bench to bench. I sat at the petitioner's table, my back straight, my jaw tight, my dress blues pressed so sharply you could cut your fingers on the creases. I didn't need to wear them, not here. This wasn't a military tribunal, but I wanted them. They reminded me who I was before all of this mess. Not a broken husband, not a pawn in some game of betrayal, but a soldier, a man who had stared down worse odds than this courtroom could ever hold. Across from me sat Clarissa, the woman I'd once promised forever to. She didn't look like the woman I married. Her hair was styled into perfect curls that shimmered under the lights, her nails long and blood red, tapping against the polished table like a clock counting down to my humiliation. She leaned back in her chair, the picture of smug confidence, and when her lips curled into that smile, I knew something cruel was coming. Her laughter cut across the room, sharp and deliberate. The judge is my lover, she said, voice ringing with venom and triumph. She didn't whisper it. She wanted everyone to hear. Every clerk, every spectator, every stranger in that gallery who'd tell the story later to friends over dinner. You're leaving this room with nothing, soldier. The gallery stirred. A chuckle, a gasp, someone clearing their throat a little too loudly. The bailiff at the door looked down, embarrassed. My ears burned, but I didn't flinch. I just watched her, my hands steady on the table. She wasn't done. She turned her head slightly, enough to catch the attention of the crowd, and jabbed the knife deeper. He's too scared to even speak. Look at him. Her attorney, Victor Hale, leaned forward, that slick-haired, overfed vulture in an expensive gray suit. He tapped his pen twice, almost like a signal, then reached into his briefcase and slid a folder across the table toward me. His smirk was a mirror of hers, cold, sure, practiced. Sign it. Now, he said, his voice low and smooth, like he'd said those words to 100 other men who'd folded under pressure. I let my eyes fall to the paper. It was a property settlement. Neat paragraphs of legal language designed to disguise the robbery in plain sight. My house, my savings, my truck. Even the retirement account I'd built over years of sacrifice, gone with the stroke of a pen. Stripped clean, gutted, and left with nothing but the uniform on my back. I didn't reach for the pen. My hand didn't twitch. Instead, I studied the words as though they meant something more than what they were, buying myself a moment, letting the silence stretch until it made them restless. Clarissa's heel tapped against the floor. Victor's pen rapped again, an impatient little beat, as though he were counting down to my surrender. The judge, her so-called lover, shifted in his seat above us. His face was blank, but his eyes darted between us, betraying the flicker of nerves beneath the robe. He expected me to fold. They all did. I lifted my head slowly. My gaze locked on Victor first, then slid to Clarissa. Her smirk widened, mistaking my calm for hesitation. Her eyes glittered like a predator who thought she'd already won. The courtroom leaned forward, every breath held, waiting for the quiet, humiliated soldier to crumble under the weight of it all. But I didn't crumble. My voice, when it came, was calm, low, and sharp enough to cut through the thick silence. You really have no idea who I am, do you? The words hung in the air, heavier than a shout, more dangerous than anger. They rippled through the courtroom, and I saw the first flicker of doubt in Clarissa's eyes. Just a flicker, but enough. Victor's pen froze in his hand. The judge adjusted his robe, shifting in his seat. I didn't move. I didn't blink. I let them look at me, really look, for the first time in months. Not as the man they thought they'd cornered. Not as the husband betrayed and broken, but as something else entirely. And though my body sat in that courtroom, my mind carried me back to the nights I'd spent watching them, waiting, preparing. To the evidence tucked away, the recordings, the bank records, the photos no one but me and a trusted friend had seen. They thought they'd strip me down to nothing but silence. They didn't know silence was my strongest weapon. I could feel the weight of the gallery's stairs, the tension coiling tighter, the whispers starting again. Clarissa tilted her head, her smirk faltering just slightly, confusion mixing with the arrogance. She didn't know what I meant. Not yet. Victor cleared his throat, trying to regain control. This is pointless, he said. He's bluffing. Sign it, soldier. You'll save yourself a world of humiliation. But I didn't move. My eyes stayed locked on them, steady as stone, the faintest ghost of a smile tugging at the corner of my mouth. Inside, my pulse was steady, my breathing calm, the same way it had been in desert firefights when the first shots rang out. You don't flinch. You don't break. You wait, and then you strike. For the first time since this nightmare began, I wasn't the one trapped. They were. They just didn't know it yet. 3 years ago, if someone had told me I'd be staring across a courtroom at Clarissa, I would have laughed in their face. Back then, she wasn't just my wife. She was my anchor, or at least that's what I believed. We met when I was still on active duty, boots dusty from deployment, eyes sharper from too many nights without sleep. She told me she admired my loyalty, my strength, my discipline. I thought her words were genuine. I thought she saw me, the man behind the uniform, the one who carried scars no one else noticed. I mistook admiration for love, and that mistake nearly cost me everything. When I rotated back stateside, shifting from field duty to a desk role at the base, the cracks started showing. Clarissa had loved being introduced as a soldier's wife. At every banquet, every officer's gathering, she soaked in the attention like it was oxygen. She loved when the wives leaned closer to hear her talk, when men glanced in admiration as we walked by. But the moment my life became quieter, less heroic, she started looking at me like I was something ordinary. The complaints came in waves. I worked too many hours. I made too little money. The excitement was gone. "You're not the man I married," she told me once, her voice sharp, her lipstick smudged from some late-night event. I laughed it off at first, chalked it up to adjustment, to her struggling with change. But deep down, I felt something shifting. Her so-called networking dinner started. At first, they were harmless, I told myself. She was ambitious, she wanted to build connections, maybe even help us climb a little higher socially. But then came the phone call she took in the garage, whispers through closed doors. Her wardrobe changed, too, suddenly filled with new dresses and jewelry I never saw on the credit card statements. When I asked, she smiled sweetly and said she borrowed them from friends. I wanted to believe her. God help me, I wanted to believe. The moment the truth came crashing down on me is carved into my memory like a scar. I'd been sent to a training seminar 3 hours away, expected to stay overnight. But the seminar ended earlier than expected, and instead of calling her, I decided to surprise her. I thought maybe the distance between us could be bridged with a gesture, that showing up early might remind her of the man she used to love. I opened the front door and froze. There were 2 wine glasses on the coffee table, half full. Her heels were tossed carelessly by the couch. And draped over my armchair, the chair I sat in every evening, was a man's suit jacket. I knew instantly whose it was before I even saw him. Victor Hale. Smooth, arrogant, the kind of lawyer who thought he could own any room he walked into. He didn't even look surprised. When I stepped into the living room, his lips curled into that smirk, the one I'd later come to know far too well. "Guess you're home early, soldier," he said. He didn't move. He didn't fumble for an excuse. He just sat there, legs crossed, like he belonged in my house. And Clarissa, my wife, my partner, sat beside him with her wine glass in hand. She giggled at his words, the kind of laugh that twisted in my chest like a knife. It wasn't nervous laughter or guilty laughter. It was amusement, entertainment. She looked at me like I was the intruder. I didn't yell. I didn't hit him. I didn't even ask why. My training, my discipline, kept me still. On the surface, I was calm. But inside, something died that night. Not the kind of death that comes suddenly, but the slow suffocation of trust, of love, of respect. I realized I had been living beside a stranger, one who valued appearances and power over loyalty and truth. The days that followed were a blur of excuses from her. "It's not what you think. He was just helping me with some legal matters. You're paranoid from all those years in the service." But the image of them in my living room was burned into my mind, and no words could erase it. And then came the revelation that shattered the last of my illusions. Victor wasn't just her lover. He was her chosen attorney for the divorce. The man who had mocked me in my own home was now the man tasked with stripping me of everything I owned. And when I learned he was close friends with Judge Ellsworth, the very man presiding over my case, I realized I wasn't walking into a fair fight. They thought the battlefield was stacked against me. They thought I'd roll over quietly, too broken to resist. But I had been in unfair fights before, and I had never walked into one unprepared. I kept my silence after that night, not because I was weak, but because silence is a weapon. Most men crumble when their wives betray them, lashing out, begging, or storming off to lick their wounds. That wasn't me. I'd spent years in hostile environments, staring down situations where one wrong move could get me or my team killed. You learn to wait. You learn to observe. And you learn that patience cuts deeper than anger ever could. Clarissa mistook my quiet for surrender. She walked around the house with her phone glued to her ear, whispering in corners, smiling into the shadows, her voice dripping with confidence. Victor came and went like he owned the place. Sometimes he left ties on the back of the chair or cufflinks on the counter, little trophies he planted to remind me that he was the new man in her life. They wanted me humiliated, broken, begging. Instead, I watched, listened, and planned. It was Marcus Dyer, an old friend from the Criminal Investigation Division, who gave me my first weapon. We'd served together overseas, and I trusted him like a brother. When I explained what was happening, his jaw tightened, and he told me flatly, "You don't need to scream, you need proof. Let me help." Within a week, Marcus had pulled records from places no divorce attorney would bother to look. Hidden accounts, transfers routed through shell companies, a condo tucked away under a cousin's name. I stared at the documents spread across my kitchen table, the numbers screaming betrayal louder than any whispered phone call. She thought I'd never see them, that I'd accept whatever settlement Victor slid across a courtroom table. She had no idea I was already building my arsenal. The final blow, though, was the recording. Legal, clean, airtight. Marcus set up a wire during one of their private dinners. He walked me through the process, showed me how airtight the chain of custody would be. "They're arrogant," he told me. "They won't hide their schemes because they think you're already beaten." He was right. I remember the first time I pressed play. Victor's voice, smooth as oil, poured through the speaker. "Relax, Clarissa. The judge will sign whatever we put in front of him. He's been my friend for years. We'll bleed him dry." My chest tightened, but I didn't stop the recording. Then came her laugh, sharp and mocking, the same one she used in court. "He's too scared to even speak. He won't fight back." Every word was a nail in the coffin of the life I'd built with her. But instead of pain, I felt something colder. Purpose. That recording became my ace in the hole, the weapon I would use when the time was right. I labeled it Exhibit Z and stored it carefully in a secure folder, along with the bank records, photos, and testimonies. I saw her less and less as the days dragged toward the hearing. She was too busy flaunting Victor on her arm at dinners, attending parties, laughing loudly in front of friends who once called me brother. To them, I was the fool, the soldier who didn't know how to fight in the civilized world of law and money. But every insult, every sneer, every whisper about my silence just sharpened the edge of what was coming. At night, when the house was empty and the kids stayed with my father, I sat at the kitchen table, reviewing everything. Every transfer, every email, every recorded word. The silence of the house pressed down on me, but it didn't break me. It steadied me. I wasn't just preparing for divorce. I was preparing for war. Clarissa thought my silence meant defeat. Victor thought his smirk was enough to bury me. The judge, their ally, thought his robe made him untouchable. They all believed they'd won before the fight began. But I knew something they didn't. I had been in unfair fights before, and I never walked into one unprepared. The judge's voice cut through the thick air of the courtroom, stern and impatient. "Mr. Briggs, either sign the agreement or state your objection." His tone wasn't neutral. There was an edge to it, a familiarity in the way he looked at Victor, as if he was already expecting to rule in their favor. That alone told me everything I needed to know about how deep their corruption ran. I rose slowly, deliberately, smoothing down the front of my uniform jacket. Every movement was controlled, measured, just like I'd been trained for years to do in the service. I could feel eyes on me from every corner of the room. The gallery packed with spectators who thought they were about to witness another man crushed beneath the weight of betrayal. Clarissa leaned back with her arms crossed, smirk painted across her face like victory already belonged to her. Victor tilted his head with mock boredom, tapping his fingers on the table as though my delay was some minor inconvenience. "My honor, I do have an objection," I said, my voice steady calm. Then I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a small black device. A digital recorder. Its weight in my hand felt heavier than any weapon I had carried in combat, because this one wasn't built to take lives. It was built to destroy lies. Victor laughed, an ugly sound that echoed too loudly in the quiet room. "This is a transparent stall tactic, Your Honor. He's desperate. There's no new evidence on record. He's wasting the court's time." I placed the recorder gently on the table, pressing the button until the red light blinked. "Actually, there is," I said, labeled for submission as Exhibit Z. The room shifted in an instant. Murmurs rippled through the gallery. The clerk sat up straighter in her chair, and even the judge leaned forward, brows knitting. Clarissa's smirk faltered, but she quickly caught herself, rolling her eyes as if to dismiss whatever I thought I was doing. "Proceed," the judge said, his tone still clipped but now tinged with curiosity. I pressed play. The silence that followed was broken by a voice everyone in that room recognized. Victor's. Smooth, arrogant, dripping with confidence. "Relax, Clarissa. The judge will sign whatever we put in front of him. He's been my friend for years. We'll bleed him dry." Gasps filled the gallery. A woman in the back clutched her pearls. The bailiff's jaw tightened. I didn't look at Clarissa, but I heard her sharp intake of breath. And then came the sound I had been waiting for. Clarissa's laugh, unmistakable, echoing through the speakers. "He's too scared to even speak. He won't fight back." The sound of her voice filled the courtroom, her mockery broadcast for everyone to hear. It was no longer just my humiliation, it was theirs. The whispers swelled, a tide of disbelief and outrage rolling through the gallery. Victor's chair screeched as he bolted upright. "Objection. This is an invasion of privacy. This is inadmissible." The judge's gavel slammed against the desk, silencing him. "Overruled. Sit down, Mr. Hale." The sternness in his tone cracked like a whip, and for the first time, Victor's confident mask slipped. His face paled, beads of sweat forming along his temple. I pressed play again, letting the rest of the recording roll. Another line, Victor's voice, colder this time. "Even if he tries, I'll bury him. The judge is my buddy. We've done this before." The gallery erupted. People muttered, shook their heads, some even shouted in outrage. The bailiffs stepped forward, one moving closer to the recorder, the other positioning himself near Victor, ready for whatever came next. Clarissa's hands trembled as she reached for Victor's sleeve, her nails digging into the fabric. The judge leaned forward, his eyes no longer warm with familiarity. They were cold, sharp, and furious. "Is that your voice, counselor?" Victor's mouth opened, but nothing came out at first. He stammered, voice shaking. "Your Honor, it's taken out of context." "Enough," the judge snapped, slamming his gavel again. The sharp cracks silenced the room instantly. "Do not insult this court with flimsy excuses. This recording demonstrates clear collusion and misconduct. Bailiff, seize that device and enter it into evidence immediately." One of the bailiffs approached, picking up the recorder with gloved hands. The other stood firm at Victor's side, his shadow looming over the man who had once thought he controlled this room. Clarissa's face had drained of color, her smug grin replaced with wide, frantic eyes. She turned to Victor, whispering something too low for anyone but me to hear. "What do we do now?" Her voice was panicked, sharp, nothing like the confident laughter that had filled the room moments before. Victor didn't answer. He couldn't. He looked at me once, his eyes filled not with arrogance, but with something I recognized immediately, fear. I stood silently, my face unreadable, but inside I felt the calm satisfaction of a man who had waited patiently for the moment his enemies exposed themselves. They thought I was broken. They thought I was beaten, but they forgot something important. I wasn't scared. I wasn't silent. I was ready, and this was only the beginning. The silence in that courtroom after the recording stopped was almost suffocating. I could hear the low hum of the air conditioning, the creak of an old bench as someone shifted, even the faint scrape of the judge's pen against paper as he wrote something down. Every sound seemed magnified because no one dared to speak. The smug laughter that had filled the room minutes earlier had vanished like smoke in the wind. Victor Hale stood there, his face pale, his jaw clenched so tight I thought it might snap. He opened his mouth once, closed it again, then finally managed to force words out, his V. The judge's gavel came down with a crack that made everyone jump. "Mr. Hale, do not insult this court with such a flimsy excuse." His tone was different now. Gone was the casual warmth he had shown earlier, the look of familiarity that had passed between him and Victor when the session began. His eyes were narrowed, his jaw set. He looked less like a man protecting an old friend and more like a man suddenly realizing the ground beneath him had given way. Two bailiffs stepped forward. One carefully collected the recorder, logging it as evidence. The other planted himself directly beside Victor, close enough that the attorney shifted uneasily in his chair. Clarissa looked from one to the other, her lips trembling, her earlier smirk a distant memory. She leaned toward Victor, her whisper harsh but loud enough for me to hear. "Fix this. You promised me." Victor hissed back, "Be quiet." But the tremor in his voice gave him away. The judge turned his gaze on me, and for the first time since this process began, I didn't feel like prey. "Mr. Briggs," he said, his voice more measured now, "I will be reviewing this evidence thoroughly. Until then, all asset transfer requests are frozen pending investigation. Custody arrangements will remain unchanged until this court decides otherwise." I gave a sharp nod. "Understood, Your Honor. I am confident the full truth will make itself clear." I didn't add that this was just one piece of the puzzle. I had photographs waiting in my folder, bank transfer logs tracing every cent she had siphoned away, even an email linking both her and Victor to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. Exhibit Z was just the tip of the spear, and it had already pierced deep. Clarissa's face twisted into fury. She leaned toward Victor again, her words a harsh whisper. "We need to settle before this gets worse." Victor tried to stay composed, but sweat beaded at his hairline. He muttered back, "If the judge pursues this, we're finished. We can talk settlement later." Clarissa's eyes flared. "Settle? Are you insane? I'm not giving him anything." Her voice cracked on the last word, too loud, drawing stares from the gallery. I didn't react outwardly. I sat there, still, silent, watching. But inside, a calm satisfaction spread through me. This was no longer about what I would get. It was about how much they would lose. The judge called for a brief recess. The gavel struck again, and people began to murmur, the sound like a hive of bees waking up. The bailiffs escorted Victor to the side of the chamber, one staying close enough to remind him of his new place. Clarissa sat frozen, her chest rising and falling too quickly, her composure cracking like glass under a hammer. As the gallery emptied, whispers chased me like shadows. "Did you hear that recording? That poor man, look what they tried to do. He kept his cool the whole time." For the first time since this nightmare began, I wasn't the fool, the soldier too simple for the real world. I was the man who had outmaneuvered them. Clarissa finally turned her glare on me as the bailiffs moved Victor out of sight. "You think you've won?" she spat under her breath. "This isn't over. It'll never be over." I met her eyes, calm, unwavering. "You're right," I said softly. "It's not over. Not yet." Because the truth was, I hadn't even swung the second strike. That night, long after the courtroom had emptied and the echoes of the gavel had faded from memory, I didn't go home. I didn't pour myself a drink to celebrate. I didn't collapse from the weight of relief. I walked straight into the district attorney's office, a thick folder in my hand, Marcus waiting for me in the lobby. Clarissa thought the courtroom was her stage, that the worst had already passed. She had no idea the storm I was about to unleash. What happened in court that day was only the beginning. I didn't go home after that first hearing. My boots carried me straight from the courthouse to the district attorney's office, the weight of the folder in my hand heavier than any rucksack I'd ever hauled through sand or snow. Marcus was waiting for me in the lobby, leaning against the wall in his plain suit, looking more like a detective from some old noir film than the CID investigator he really was. He gave me a small nod, the kind we used to exchange before kicking in doors overseas. No words, just understanding. "Ready?" he asked. "As I'll ever be," I said. My grip on the folder tightened. The receptionist's eyes flicked between us as we approached the desk. "Mr. Briggs?" she asked, her tone cautious, as though she'd already been briefed. "Yes," I replied. "District Attorney Rhodes will see you now." Evelyn Rhodes was a woman who didn't waste time. Her office was neat, organized, every file stacked with military precision. She rose when we entered, extended her hand firmly, and gestured for us to sit. Her eyes, sharp and unyielding, scanned me as though she was measuring my worth in the span of a heartbeat. "Mr. Briggs," she said, her voice even, "I understand you have something that requires immediate attention." I opened the folder and spread the contents across her desk. Photographs first. Clarissa and Victor in the Maldives. Champagne glasses raised in a toast during the week. She swore she'd been at a women's leadership conference. Bank statements next. Money siphoned from our joint account into shell corporations with Victor's signature all over them. Finally, the emails. Lines of text that tied them both to offshore accounts. The words as damning as fingerprints on a weapon. Evelyn's expression hardened with every page she flipped. She didn't rush, didn't skim. She read carefully, her eyes narrowing. When she finally looked up, her voice was cold steel. "Mr. Briggs, this isn't just family court fraud. This is conspiracy, financial misconduct, attempted bribery of a public official. We'll be opening a criminal investigation immediately." A breath I hadn't realized I was holding left me slow and controlled. "That's all I wanted to hear," I said. By the time Marcus and I walked back out into the sunlight, the gears were already in motion. Warrants were being drafted. Names were being flagged. The case that Clarissa and Victor thought they controlled had just been ripped from their hands and placed into the jaws of the state. The following week, I walked back into court, but the air was different this time. Tense, heavy. No longer did I feel the smug weight of their confidence pressing down on me. Instead, there was a ripple of unease that moved through the gallery as I entered. Victor was there, but his swagger was gone. He wouldn't even meet my eyes. Clarissa sat beside him, her lips pressed into a thin line, her eyes darting around the room like a trapped animal searching for an escape. Then I saw them, two men in dark suits seated near the back. Internal affairs. They weren't there for me. They were there for him. When the judge took his seat, he shuffled through his papers more than usual, his hands betraying the nerves he tried to hide. He cleared his throat, his voice louder than necessary. "Before we proceed, this court has been made aware of ongoing criminal inquiries involving parties present." His eyes flicked to Victor, then to Clarissa. "As such, all divorce proceedings are suspended pending the outcome of said investigation." The room erupted in murmurs. Clarissa whipped her head toward Victor, her face pale. The judge raised his hand for silence, then continued. "Furthermore," he paused deliberately, his gaze locking on Victor. "Mr. Hale, you are hereby removed from this case. Bailiff, please escort Mr. Hale to the side chamber for questioning." The sound that came from Clarissa was almost theatrical, a gasp that drew even more attention than she intended. She grabbed for Victor's arm, her nails digging into his sleeve. No, they can't." Victor didn't even glance at her. His face was ashen, his body stiff as the bailiff's hand landed firmly on his shoulder. The gallery leaned forward, watching like spectators at an execution. I leaned toward Clarissa, my voice low enough that only she could hear. "You told me I had no choice. You were right. I didn't. I had to destroy you." Her face drained of blood, her lips parting as though to argue, but no sound came out. She knew. For the first time, she understood that this wasn't about bargaining anymore. It wasn't about who got the house or the truck or the savings. This was about consequences. The bailiff guided Victor out of the courtroom, and the whispers swelled into a low roar. Clarissa sat frozen, her hands trembling on the table, her composure shattered. And me? I sat tall, my uniform crisp, my face calm, the weight of years of silence and planning lifting from my shoulders. This wasn't the end. It wasn't even the peak. It was the moment the tide finally turned. Clarissa thought she had orchestrated my downfall. She thought she could laugh in my face, flaunt her lover, and strip me of everything I'd built. But now she was beginning to understand the truth. She hadn't set a trap for me. I had set one for her. 3 weeks later, their world began to collapse in on itself. It started small, a whisper on the local news, just another story in the evening lineup. Prominent attorney and companion accused of bribing judge in divorce case involving decorated veteran. That was the first headline. But by the next morning, it wasn't just whispers anymore. It was a storm. The audio clip was everywhere. Victor's smug voice, declaring the judge was his friend and that they'd bleed me dry, played on repeat. And then came her laugh, Clarissa's laugh. Sharp, mocking, cruel. Hearing it on television, broadcast to thousands of homes, stripped it of its power. What once cut me to the bone now turned on her like a blade in her own back. I remember standing in my kitchen, the news anchor's voice echoing through the room as my phone buzzed nonstop on the counter. Messages poured in from numbers I hadn't seen in years. Old comrades from the service. Friends who had drifted away during my marriage. Even family who had kept their distance because of Clarissa's sharp tongue. Some messages were short, just saw the news. Proud of you. Others were longer. Apologies for doubting me, for believing her stories, for assuming I'd somehow deserved the humiliation she'd tried to heap on me. I didn't respond to most of them. I didn't need to. Their silence back then had already told me enough. But what mattered more than any message was the look on my kids' faces when they saw the truth come out. My son, only 12, walked into the kitchen with his tablet in hand, eyes wide. "Dad," he said, "everyone at school knows now. They were saying bad stuff before, about you, because Mom told them things. But now," he trailed off, biting his lip. Then he smiled for the first time in weeks. "Now they know you weren't lying." That was worth more than any headline. Meanwhile, Clarissa's carefully built image was crumbling. Her friends, the same women who once flocked around her at banquets and fundraisers, vanished overnight. The woman who lived for attention now found herself avoided like a sickness. She couldn't walk into a grocery store without whispers chasing her down the aisles. That's her, the one who laughed while cheating the soldier. Victor's fall was even harder. The Bar Association moved quickly. Within a month, he was disbarred, stripped of his license, his name plastered across legal bulletins as a cautionary tale. The same arrogance that once made him untouchable now made him infamous. When the charges were officially filed, he faced the possibility of 12 years behind bars. And the judge, Ellsworth, the man who once sat so confidently above us, was suspended pending a full ethics review. The state moved to investigate him for bribery, corruption, and misconduct. His photograph, once displayed proudly in legal circles, now appeared on screens with the caption, "Under fire." But it was Clarissa who faced the ugliest reality. The DA's office came down on her with charges of conspiracy and fraud. Her accounts were frozen. The luxury car she loved to flaunt was repossessed, hauled off on a tow truck in broad daylight, as neighbors peeked through curtains. The condo she had secretly purchased with stolen money was seized. For a woman who measured her worth in possessions and appearances, the unraveling was brutal. Her family, who had once sneered at me for not being good enough, suddenly went quiet. The same parents who told her she deserved better than a soldier disappeared when the storm hit. Whispers reached me that they'd mortgaged their own home to cover her spiraling legal fees. I almost pitied them. Almost. But pity wasn't something I could afford anymore. Not for her. Not for them. The real turning point came at the final hearing that month. I walked into the courtroom, my shoulders squared, my head high. The gallery was packed, the air heavy with anticipation. Clarissa sat alone this time, no Victor at her side. He was too busy scrambling for a deal to save his own skin. She looked smaller than I'd ever seen her, her face drawn, her eyes hollow from nights without sleep. She avoided looking at me, staring instead at the polished wood of the table as though it could swallow her whole. The new judge, a man with no ties to Victor, no ties to Ellsworth, looked over the case file with sharp eyes. He flipped through pages, paused at the transcripts, then finally looked at me. "Mr. Briggs," he said, his voice steady and clear, "in light of overwhelming evidence of misconduct, you are granted full custody of your children, sole ownership of all disputed assets, and immediate dissolution of the marriage." The words rang through the room like music, every syllable a chord of justice. "Mrs. Briggs," the judge continued, turning to her, "you are ordered to pay restitution once you are legally able. This court does not look kindly on betrayal of trust, both marital and judicial." Her hands shook as the gavel came down. The sound reverberated through the room, sealing her fate. I stood, buttoned my jacket, and leaned close enough to her as I passed that only she could hear. No other choice, remember? She froze, her breath catching, her eyes wide. For the first time, she wasn't smirking. She wasn't laughing. She was afraid. Outside the courtroom, my father waited with my kids. Their faces lit up when they saw me, smiles breaking through the storm we had all endured. For months, they had carried the weight of her lies, the coldness of her betrayal. Now, they could finally breathe. I hugged them tight, feeling the strength of their small arms around me. And in that moment, I realized something important. Winning wasn't about the house or the truck or the bank account. Winning was about walking out of that courthouse free, my kids at my side, and knowing the truth had finally cut through the lies. Clarissa's empire had collapsed, brick by brick, lie by lie. And I hadn't even lifted a hand. I'd just shown the world who she really was. And the world was watching. The morning of the final judgment, I woke up before dawn. Old habits die hard. Years in the service had trained me to rise before the sun, to prepare for battle before anyone else stirred. This day felt no different. Except now, the battlefield wasn't sand dunes or ruined streets halfway across the world. It was a courtroom where words and evidence would do the fighting for me. I ironed my uniform again, every crease sharp, every button polished. I didn't need to wear it, but I wanted to. That uniform wasn't just fabric. It was a reminder that I had endured worse than betrayal, worse than humiliation. It told the world I wasn't broken, no matter how hard she had tried to make me look that way. When I arrived, the courthouse was buzzing. Reporters clustered outside, microphones ready, their cameras snapping like machine gun fire. The story had become bigger than any of us could have predicted. Soldiers, veterans, ordinary men and women. They had latched onto the scandal, onto the image of a wife laughing while conspiring with a corrupt lawyer and a crooked judge. It wasn't just my fight anymore. It was a symbol. Betrayal exposed. Arrogance humbled. Justice demanded. I walked through the doors without answering questions, my focus locked on what waited inside. The hallways hummed with whispers. Some people looked at me with pity, others with respect, but all eyes followed me. When I stepped into the courtroom, it was packed. The gallery was standing room only, every bench filled, the air thick with anticipation. Clarissa sat at the respondents' table, alone. No Victor beside her this time. He was too busy facing his own charges, his career in shambles. She looked smaller somehow, her carefully maintained glamour fraying at the edges. Her hair wasn't as glossy, her makeup couldn't hide the dark circles under her eyes, and her once arrogant posture had collapsed into something hunched, defensive. She kept her gaze fixed on the table, refusing to meet mine. The new judge entered, robes swishing, his face stern but impartial. Unlike Ellsworth, he had no stake in this. No backroom dinners, no whispered promises. His only loyalty was to the law. And today, the law was a sword poised to fall. Court is now in session, the clerk announced. The proceedings began with the formalities, but they were only preludes to what everyone knew was coming. The judge rifled through the thick case file, pages of transcripts, bank records, photographs, and evidence that painted a story darker than any novel. Each document was another nail in the coffin of Clarissa's schemes. I sat still, hands folded, face unreadable. Inside, I could feel my pulse steady, not racing but calm, measured, the way it had been before raids overseas. I wasn't here to fight anymore. The fight was already won. This was the victory march. Finally, the judge looked up, his eyes scanning the room before settling on me. "Mr. Briggs," he said, his voice clear, deliberate, echoing in the silence. "In light of the overwhelming evidence of misconduct, fraud, and collusion brought before this court, you are granted full custody of your children, sole ownership of all disputed assets, and immediate dissolution of the marriage." The words rang through the courtroom like a bell, every syllable sharp, final. He turned to Clarissa, who had gone pale, her knuckles white as she gripped the edge of the table. "Mrs. Briggs, you are hereby ordered to pay restitution once you are legally able. This court finds your actions reprehensible, and you will bear the consequences." The gavel struck, loud and final. For a moment, the room was silent, as though everyone was absorbing what had just been handed down. Then came the whispers, the rush of voices, the collective intake of breath. Clarissa's body trembled, her composure shattering like glass dropped on marble. She turned her head slightly, her eyes darting toward me, desperate, searching for something. Pity, perhaps, or a crack in my resolve. I stood slowly, buttoning my jacket with deliberate calm. As I walked past her, I leaned down just enough for her to hear me, my voice low, steady, carrying every ounce of weight she had earned. No other choice, remember? Her lips parted, but no words came. For the first time since this began, she had nothing to say. I didn't stop to watch her break. I walked out of that courtroom, my boots echoing on the polished floor, each step carrying me further from the wreckage of what she had turned our life into. My father was waiting outside with my kids. The moment they saw me, they broke into smiles, real smiles, not the forced ones they'd worn during the long months of uncertainty. My son ran forward, clutching my hand, while my father's eyes, steady and proud, met mine. He didn't need to say anything. The nod he gave me was enough. The cameras were waiting outside, reporters shouting questions, their flashes lighting up the steps like a battlefield at night. I shielded my kids as we walked past, ignoring the frenzy. This wasn't for them. It wasn't for anyone else. This moment belonged to us. We climbed into the truck, the same truck Clarissa had tried to take from me, the one she had once sneered at for being too plain. As the engine rumbled to life, I looked in the rearview mirror. The courthouse loomed behind us, a place that had almost become my prison, now reduced to just another building. Clarissa would still be inside, her world collapsing, her carefully crafted lies unraveling in front of the entire town. But that wasn't my concern anymore. Driving away, my son leaned forward from the back seat. "So, we're staying with you now, right? Forever?" I glanced at him through the mirror, catching the hope in his eyes. "Forever," I said. The weight of that word settled over me like a shield. Forever. No more weekend visits dictated by her whims. No more nights wondering if she was whispering poison into their ears. They were mine now, not as possessions, but as children who finally had stability, who finally knew the truth. Later that night, after the kids had gone to bed at my father's house, I sat out on the porch with him. The night air was cool, the crickets chirping in the dark. He handed me a glass of bourbon, and we sat in silence for a while, the kind of silence only two men who'd been through storms could share. "You did good, son," he finally said. "I did what I had to do," I replied. He nodded, taking a sip. "Sometimes that's the same thing." I thought about Clarissa then, about the smirk she used to wear like armor, the laugh that had once cut me open but now echoed in recordings as evidence of her downfall. I wondered if she was still sitting in that courtroom, stunned, broken, realizing she had played her final hand and lost everything. But the truth was, I didn't care anymore. Not really. What mattered was the kids asleep inside. The future stretched out before us, the knowledge that I had fought back, not with fists, not with anger, but with patience, precision, and truth. The sweetest victory wasn't in watching her collapse. It was in walking away, free, with everything that truly mattered still intact. For the first time in years, I felt something I had almost forgotten. Peace. 2 months passed before her handwriting found its way back into my life. It came in the form of an envelope, the kind that looked tired before you even opened it. Creased corners, a faint stain on the flap, and a shaky scrawl that barely resembled the neat loops she once used to sign cards and write shopping lists. When I saw my name on the front, I knew instantly what waited inside. Not an apology, not remorse, not the words I had secretly hoped for once upon a time. No, this would be something else entirely. I sat at the kitchen table with the envelope in my hand. The cabin was quiet, the kids off with my father for the weekend. Outside, the mountain air rolled in cool through the open windows, carrying the scent of pine and earth. For a moment, I thought about tossing it straight into the fire. Let her words burn before they ever reached me. But curiosity has a way of clawing at a man. I slid my finger under the flap and pulled the single sheet free. The words were short, the sentences clipped. "I can't find work. I can't pay rent. Please, just enough to get me through until I find something, for the kids' sake." There it was. No "I'm sorry." No admission of what she'd done. No acknowledgement of the months she'd spent laughing at me, conspiring against me, mocking me while she planned my ruin. Just a plea wrapped in entitlement. She hadn't changed. She still believed I existed to bail her out, to shoulder the burden of her mistakes. I let the letter sit on the table as I stared out the window. The The mountains rose tall in the distance, steady and immovable, reminders of endurance. My hand brushed over the worn wood of the table, grounding me in the present. I thought about my children asleep in their rooms upstairs, finally free of the chaos she'd brought into our lives. I thought about the late nights I had spent piecing together evidence, the hours of silence that had weighed on me like stone. And then I thought about her laugh in that recording, sharp and cruel, played over and over on television for the world to hear. Clarissa wanted me to forget all of that with one shaky letter. She wanted me to pretend her betrayal never happened, that her choices hadn't carved scars across my children's lives. I folded the paper carefully, not out of care for her words, but because I already knew what I was going to do with it. I slipped it into a new envelope and then walked to the mantel, where a photo sat in a simple wooden frame. It was taken just the week before, me, the kids, my father, and someone new. Her name was Julia, a friend who had slowly become more than that. She wasn't flashy or hungry for attention. She didn't measure love in bank accounts or appearances. She laughed with my kids, cooked with my father, and looked at me with the kind of quiet steadiness I hadn't realized I'd been missing. I took the photo from the frame and studied it. My son's grin, my daughter's arm looped through Julia's, my father's proud eyes, and me, standing in the middle of them, smiling in a way I hadn't in years. This was my life now. Not the ruins Clarissa had left behind, but the new foundation I had built out of ash and grit. I slid the photo into the envelope with her letter. On the back, in bold black ink, I wrote a single line. You were right. I had no choice. I chose to live without you. 2 weeks later, word came back through a mutual acquaintance. One of those people who thrived on gossip, the kind who always carried news whether you wanted it or not. Clarissa had been evicted. She was staying in a rundown motel on the edge of town, a place where the carpets smelled of mildew and the walls held the stories of too many broken lives. She was sharing a room with strangers, surviving on what little she could scrape together in cash. The woman who once demanded crystal chandeliers and luxury vacations was now lining up at vending machines for dinner. The one who laughed at my boring truck now rode buses where the seats were torn and the air stank of exhaust. She had gone from mocking my discipline to begging for scraps in less time than it takes for a season to change. And me? I had just signed a 6-figure contract overseas. A security project that would set my family up for years, the kind of deal men dreamed of but rarely achieved. The company wanted me for my discipline, my precision, the very qualities Clarissa had dismissed as dull. My kids would never want for stability again. They had a future built on honor and resilience, not lies and stolen accounts. I didn't gloat. I didn't call her. I didn't even tell the kids about her letter. There was no need. Her downfall wasn't mine to celebrate. It was hers to endure. Betrayal doesn't just burn bridges. It leaves you stranded on an island you set on fire yourself. She had lit the match, and now she was choking on the smoke. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the mountains, I sat on the porch of the cabin with Julia. The kids were inside playing cards with my father, their laughter spilling through the windows. Julia rested her hand on mine, her eyes soft but strong. "Do you ever think about her?" she asked quietly. I took a long breath, watching the last streaks of light fade into dusk. "Not the way I used to," I admitted. "I don't think about what she did anymore. I think about what she lost. And I think about how close I came to losing myself." Julia nodded, squeezing my hand gently. "But you didn't." "No," I said, my eyes fixed on the horizon. "I didn't." Clarissa's letter still sat in my drawer, not as a reminder of pain, but as proof. Proof that she had tried to drag me down one last time, even after the gavel had fallen, even after the truth had gutted her world. Proof that I hadn't answered. Because sometimes, the sweetest revenge isn't in striking back. It's in choosing not to. It's in walking away, living well, and letting the silence do the work. I closed my eyes and listened to the sound of my children's laughter. That was all the answer I would ever need. The weeks after her letter became a turning point, not because of what she had written, but because of what it confirmed. Clarissa's words were proof she hadn't changed, proof that even when stripped of everything, she still believed I owed her something. But I didn't owe her a damn thing. Not anymore. Life moved forward faster than I expected. The overseas contract I had signed began to open doors I hadn't thought possible. It wasn't just a paycheck. It was a recognition of my skills, my discipline, my ability to see details others overlooked. The company flew me out for briefings, and for the first time in years, I felt that same spark I'd felt in the service. Purpose. Only this time, the mission wasn't for a government. It was for my kids, my father, and myself. I came home from one of those meetings to find my daughter sitting on the cabin steps, her sketchbook in her lap, her pencil smudging her fingertips. She looked up at me with a grin that still had baby teeth missing from the edges. "Dad, I drew us," she said, flipping the book to show me. There it was. Me, her brother, and Grandpa on the porch, with Julia standing beside us. The drawing was rough, childlike, but it was real. We weren't broken pieces anymore. We were a family, whole in a way I never thought we'd be again. At dinner that night, my father poured himself a glass of whiskey and gave me a look I recognized. It was the look he gave me before my first deployment, the look he gave me when my kids were born, the look that said he saw something in me I sometimes couldn't see myself. "You've done right by them," he said simply, nodding toward the kids. I thought about how far we had come, from the nights when I sat in silence, wondering how I would protect them, to now, sitting at a table where laughter filled the air and plates clattered with the comfort of home. Clarissa had tried to strip that from me, but she couldn't. She had underestimated the one thing she could never touch, my resolve. Word about her continued to trickle in. Small-town gossip has a way of finding its path, like water seeping through cracks. She had moved from the motel to a cheaper one across town, the kind of place where lights flickered and the walls smelled of bleach. She was working odd jobs, cash under the table, nothing that lasted more than a week or two. People who once called her friend now avoided her on sight. I heard she'd even tried to beg money from her parents, but they'd grown tired of her demands. They had mortgaged their home once to cover her legal fees, and it nearly broke them. Now they refused to bail her out. Every piece of news about her used to stir something in me. Anger, bitterness, sometimes even pity. But not anymore. Now, when I heard her name, it barely registered. She was just another shadow, one that faded more each day as the sun of my new life rose higher. One evening, Julia and I stood on the porch, watching the kids chase each other across the yard. The air was cool, the mountains glowing orange in the fading light. She slipped her hand into mine and leaned her head against my shoulder. "You seem lighter," she said softly. I thought about her words. She was right. For months, maybe even years, I had carried the weight of betrayal, of anger, of the need to prove myself. But standing there, with my children laughing and my father humming an old tune inside, I realized I had set that weight down without even noticing. "I think I finally understand," I said. "Understand what?" she asked. "That revenge isn't the point. Living well is." She burned her bridges, and now she's stranded on the island she set on fire herself. Me? I've built something new, something better. Julia smiled, her eyes glinting in the fading sun. "That's why you're different. You didn't let her destroy you." And she was right. Clarissa had tried to define me by silence, by humiliation, by stripping me of everything I owned. But I had refused to let her dictate the ending of my story. I had chosen my own. Weeks later, I stood at the airport, ticket in hand for my first overseas assignment with a new company. My kids hugged me tight, my daughter clinging to my leg, my son pressing his face into my chest. "We'll be here when you get back," my father said, his voice steady, his arm wrapped around them both. Julia kissed me goodbye, her hand lingering in mine. As I walked through security, I turned once to look back at them. They stood together, waving, smiling, their silhouettes framed against the glass. My heart swelled with something I hadn't felt in a long time, certainty. I knew I wasn't leaving them behind. I was building a future for them, a future Clarissa had tried to steal but failed. On the plane, as it lifted into the sky, I closed my eyes and thought about everything. The courtroom, the laughter, the recording, the letter, the photo I'd sent her, the one with the words she couldn't ignore. All of it seemed distant now, like echoes from another life. Betrayal had nearly broken me, but in the end, it forged me into something stronger. A man who didn't crumble under silence. A father who didn't abandon his children. A soldier who fought a different kind of war and won. The sweetest revenge wasn't in seeing her lose. It was in knowing I didn't need her to lose in order to win. My victory was here, in the faces of my children, in the pride of my father, in the quiet steadiness of Julia's hand in mine. in the life I had built from the ruins she left behind. As the plane climbed higher, I whispered to myself the words that had carried me through it all. You really had no idea who I was. And now, she never would.